today, many of them involved in fiber to the home, some in IoT, some in metro fiber networks, and all of them are doing one very, very specific thing, and that is they are adding a lot more customers to the network. That's in the form of consumers, that's in the form of businesses, and all of that has a very, very specific impact on the types of networks that we build and offer throughout the African continent. One of our large focus areas as Liquid Telecom is to not just build a large backbone that services the country, but also importantly is to connect to the biggest of the undersea cables, to connect with all the large internet providers, and to really land internet capacity on the African continent in various countries on the African continent. When we think about business forecasting specifically, and as we ready ourselves for the size of networks that we need to build, one of the attributes of business forecasting is really about how do you actually forecast. And this could be any business. This could be a manufacturing company. This could be whether it's a car manufacturer, it could be a food production company. Business forecasting has a couple of critical attributes that must be taken into account. One, of course, is its past performance. How has your business been performing? What are the revenue numbers that you've been delivering? What are the costs that you've been running at in order to achieve the results that you just completed? But that's only a small component of actually what forecasting is really all about. Forecasting is really all about looking at what the current state is, looking at what the current socio-economic status is, looking at what the political status is, looking at all of the other demand drivers that are present in the economy at that point in time, and importantly, what forecast in each of those drivers are. So there are many macroeconomic factors, there are many demand-related factors that could be influencing future demand, and those are all components that must come into that picture as you forecast for your business. For networks, it's a little bit different. So what we'd have to do is, to a large extent, is think about what each of those industries and each of those verticals have been forecasting for their own businesses in terms of growth, and try to aggregate all of that into what we think is going to be required to service demand, not just the present demand, but demand in the future. So you can imagine it would be pretty difficult for us to have all industries complete their budgeting exercise and then give us an early preview of that so we know what we need to do for subsequent years. That's not going to happen. So what we have to really do is do a little bit of fortune telling, but importantly, look at one of the key metrics is consumption. Look at how many more users are expected to come onto the network. And then think about, is the current state sufficient in order to service that requirement? So let me see if this build-out works. No, it doesn't work. It gives you both pictures at the same time. Okay. So the first picture on the left, on your left, is to some extent what many enterprise networks look like today. And when I say enterprise networks, I also do mean service provider, as in ISP networks. And that's not a direct replication of what it physically looks at, but it really is a mess. It is I wouldn't call it hot, probably a warm mess to an extent, a warm mess of trying to cater for demand ahead of what you've planned for. And that's not a bad position, because many service providers, ISPs, many enterprise network providers, or many enterprises themselves will also tell you that that's not a bad picture to have. It's because what they're actually doing is servicing demand real time. They're not sitting with this big empty network waiting for customers to connect to them. They're doing just-in-time servicing of requirements. And so to some extent, that's not a bad thing. But when consumption becomes so significant that you truly really need to be in a position with a picture that looks a lot more like the one on your right-hand side. That also is servicing current demand, but what that's also done is it's built for future scalability. While you can see a lot of empty slots there, it's really about vertical scalability. But it's also a design that allows you to define a path that's going to last you 2 to 3 years. It's pretty difficult to actually forecast beyond 3 years. And I heard a question from one of the panelists earlier asking, well, tell us what's going to happen with 5G and how many years it's going to take to materialize and all of that. It's a really difficult question to answer because it was very few people were able to predict that even this year 5G will have a launch in South Africa for various reasons. So what's really difficult to predict is what is consumption really going to look like. Now, I always draw on a piece of data that the Visual Networking Index from Cisco publishes every single year. And in this forecast, and they've been pretty accurate in their forecast, at least since 2010, they've been relatively accurate in this forecast, where they try to predict how much of data is going to traverse the network, the IP network around the world. And you can, there's a really nice tool that I'm able to pull out this picture from. It's called Cisco VNI Global IP Traffic. And it's an active tool, so you can actually go and see for different types of traffic, for different regions, for whether it's Middle East and Africa or North America. So you can see exactly how traffic is going to grow globally in each of these regions. What's important from this is that, the forecast that it speaks to in 2020 reaching 254 exabytes per month. Now that's a very, very, very large amount of data. Just 1 exabyte, I've given a small definition there, is 1,000 petabytes. 1 petabyte is 1,000 terabytes. So this is a very large amount of data that traverses the networks. Today, right now, if you were to size operators in terms of their capacity to service the 2020 demand. The 2020 demand is not far away, it's next year, so it's 12 months away. To build capacity into a network will take, slightly longer than 12 months to service this demand. But as of today, and if I just looked at the Middle East, Africa data, it's a much smaller number than 254, but today, the networks that are there live today are unable to service that demand. That's a fact. It just cannot service the demand.